Hello everyone, this is Alicia Walton and today we're going to be talking about the text in action assignment. So for the text in action assignment, you're going to be writing a 1200 to 1550 word paper. And yes, that's right, instead of having page numbers up here, I went ahead and went with word count. It seems to be the best way to keep you on point when it comes to length. So after you complete your paper, I'd like you to go ahead and calculate the word count and put that word count next to your name at the top of page 1. This paper is going to be written in MLA format, third person. And the only sources that you should be using for this paper are Ehrenreich or Torrado. So remember, those are the authors for Nickel and Dimed and Hand to Mouth. You shouldn't be pulling in any other outside sources. Just rely on the books themselves. Now, the peer review is going to take place for this assignment next Wednesday, so you need to make sure that you have your rough draft completed by then. And when I say completed, a rough draft is never completed really. You need to have some kind of working rough draft so that we can move through the peer review process and so that you can benefit from having your fellow students look at it and from looking at your fellow students' work as well. Now, you do not have to actually turn in this rough draft to me. You won't be doing that. All you're going to be doing is participating in the peer review. However, you will receive points for that. So that's why I say that the rough draft is due. The final draft is due on the 6th of February. You will be turning it in on SafeAssign, and then you will also print out a copy and bring it to class because we will be having class that day. So for this assignment, you are going to be exploring how a text is designed to affect its audience in certain ways. You're going to think of your analysis as a behind-the-scenes exploration of the writer or designer's rhetorical choices. So far for the class, we've read Nickeled and Dimed, and we've begun Hand to Mouth. We haven't quite finished that yet, but we've dived into it enough so that you could consider that book for this assignment as well. And for this assignment, you're going to be choosing one of those to analyze. It's up to you which one you want to choose. If you feel like you haven't read enough of Hand to Mouth at this point, then stick with Nickel and Dimed. If you feel like you relate to one book more than the other, then write about that one. With both of the texts, we've already examined some of the elements in our reading journal and writing activities over the past couple of weeks. You're welcome to review what you've already written, and you are also welcome to use what you have written already as part of this essay. In other classes, that could be considered, actually, it's kind of odd, but that could be considered stealing writing from yourself, which I've always thought was an odd concept. But in this scenario, I don't mind you doing that at all. And I don't consider it any kind of stealing or libel whatsoever. Plagiarism, excuse me. So while that works for this class, make sure that if you ever go to do that for another class, that it's okay. For this assignment, you're also not going to summarize the text like we've been doing for some of the reading journals, but instead, you're going to focus on the actions of the text. How does the text take action? Well, they do so by trying to persuade the reader by making assumptions about the reader and trying to fit it into an ongoing conversation. Basically, I want you to think about what steps the writer takes in their writing to try to make readers feel like they do, or what steps that the writer takes to make the reader feel a certain way. An example would be, why does Linda Tirado in Hand to Mouth take the tone that she does with her readers from the very beginning? You'll notice that Nickel and Dime and Hand to Mouth both have very different tones to them. Now, you're not allowed to do a compare and contrast on that, so please don't try to do that. This is just about one of those texts. But if I were to look at the Ehrenreich book, Nickel and Dimed, I might say, why does she choose to include certain information? Why does she choose to not include certain information? Those are certain questions you can ask yourself and ask within the paper. When it comes to structuring the paper, make sure that you set up your essay in MLA formatting. We had a video on that in week 1, and you should be able to look back at that and set up your paper. Also, make sure that you give your work a unique title. Just do your best to come up with a title for your paper. It doesn't have to be anything stellar or spectacular. Just try to come up with something unique instead of assignment number 1. You should have, let me go back here. You should have an introduction in your paper. Within that introduction, you should try to capture your reader's attention, give a broad overview of the paper and what will be discussed. You should have a thesis statement in that introduction. That would be placed at the last line of your introduction. Let me be specific there. Within your paper, on that last line, I want you to highlight it and make it bold so that we all know what your thesis statement is. If you have difficulty finding your thesis statement, chances are I'm going to as well, and you don't want that to be the case. So if you go to highlight your thesis statement, that last line of your introduction, and make it bold and it doesn't seem like it fits right, then this is a good opportunity to rework it. So next, you're going to move on to the body of your paper. Do not use headings. Make sure you use transitions, just like you would in any other paper. And coming up here, I have a few other sections that I talk about so that you can look through and see. Think about who the author is. Does the author have any relevant background information or education and or experience to speak on this topic? Do they not? If they don't, what does that mean? What angle of vision shapes the text and accounts for what is included, emphasized, and excluded? How fair and reliable does the author appear to be? What's the author's purpose? What do you think their desired outcome is? Who is the audience writing to in regard to audience? How do you know this from looking at the text? And then moving on to rhetorical appeals. So I mentioned kairos, kairotic or opportune moment here. So what does the author do in terms of using moments within her text to try to reach the audience? How does the author use rhetorical appeals, such as ethos, pathos, and logos to reach the audience? How effective is the how effective is the author's use of these? Remember, ethos, ethics, pathos is emotional appeal, and logos is logical appeal. And within the text, I don't need you to tell me what these are, because I already know what they are. I just need you to give me examples of how the author uses them. And remember, as I mentioned above, you're likely not going to get a chance to go into all of this, but these are just some of the concepts I'd like you to begin discussing. But for the conclusion, you definitely need to have a conclusion in your paper. Make sure that that conclusion wraps up the paper and it notices the overall effectiveness, or noting the overall effectiveness of the textbook that you read. Make sure that you reemphasize your main points. Restate the thesis statement without cutting and pasting it to the bottom of the paper. Just restate it. Rephrase it into different words. It's not too tough, I promise. The hardest part's coming up with it. I also give you a listing of things to avoid. Things to avoid: make sure that you don't format this paper in anything other than MLA. There's no need to do that. Don't format paper in Chicago style. Also, a list of good ideas. If you have difficulties with writing, or if you have any kind of difficulties with just in general with writing papers, you might want to consider stopping by the Writing Center. They have an in-person or online section that you can go to, so you can actually make an online appointment and go through your paper with someone online there as well. Best of luck with your paper. Don't forget to review this again. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm here to help. Happy writing!